Welcome back to Track Talk, and this is going to be the first in a series of videos that I hope will be ongoing that I've been teasing for a while. And we're going to do something a little bit different. Instead of looking at an individual game, we're going to start looking at the data from games in aggregate. So the inspiration from this was Toby's recent post highlighting that 200,000 games have been created on 18x.games. And you can see when you look at the ID for these games, we're now up to 205,000 games. And that's just struck me as being a lot of data. There's a lot of important information that could be drawn from this data to inform our play and debug new designs. It just is a wonderful opportunity that this site has given us that is, to my knowledge, not really been looked at in the past. So I've decided to start logging all the games on the site and then running some analytics on them. And this is going to be the first video in a series of what I found, or basically the results from that analysis. Because this is the first video, it's going to be really kind of a very superficial look at the data. It's really more of a sanity check. We're not going to be doing deep dives into any of the games. We're just going to look to start at the platform itself. How many users, how many games are there, what type of games are there, and then we'll do a very quick look at some of the most popular games to show what kind of analysis is already possible and where I hope to take this in the future. So with that context, I'm going to start pulling up a few graphs of some of the data from the site, and we can just briefly review them. The first figure we'll look at shows the number of games created over the lifespan of the site, which was started sometime in 2020. And you can see early on at the initiation of the site, people were creating a lot of games. And this is, the time when people were in 40 plus asynchronous games, that kind of thing. And then over time, these outliers with 300 some games created have gone away, and we just have kind of a steady state of about 100 games being created each day. This doesn't mean that games are completed. This doesn't mean that the games are even started necessarily. This is just how many games have been created each day. And then we have the cumulative plot here, and you can see that we have quite a few less than 200,000 games, and I will get to why that is in a little bit. The next plot is similar, but instead of looking at games created, we're looking at users. There's an important caveat to this plot, and it is that it is not the total number of users created on the website over time. I don't really have an easy way of looking at that. This is just where the users appear in our data set. So basically the first time a user has played a game on the site that I have access to. And you can see, similar to the games created, there was a spike early in the site's life, and it's died down a little bit over time, but really not dramatically so. We still have plenty of days where there are 5 new players appearing in the data set, so the site is still very much active. However, I will point out that the cumulative number of users detected by this type of analysis is much, much lower than the total number of users registered on the site, which is somewhere north of 20,000. So clearly, even with scraping the data that's available, we're missing a lot of the potential data that could have been harvested from the site. And I think the next plot is going to really show part of that problem. So when we look at this, this is the games created over time divided by their status. So games are either active, archived, finished, or new. And you can see that this huge orange block, which encompasses the majority of the website's lifespan, is archived. So these orange games we can basically just write off for further analysis. They're just not useful. These games store the final result and the users who played them, but really don't have any of the actions of the game. There's no further analysis that can be created for these games. So when we're talking about the data that's accessible for further analysis, we're really just talking about these green games, the finished games. And I'll point out that I have games spanning from the early days of the site, then a large chunk that are missing, and then the most recent games on the site. And I really have to thank another user for providing me with this data, because otherwise I think this would be lost for all time. The archived games, as far as I know, are not being stored formally anywhere, so are probably just unavailable for analysis. If, however, you are a data hoarder and you happen to have a large chunk of these games from this time period, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to take them and include them in the analysis. So just having looked at the state of the data, we can start diving in a little more detail and actually break this down by the title or the game specific game of 18xx, and that's what this graph is attempting to do. I will zoom in a little bit so you can see, and you can see that far and away the most popular game on the site is 1846, which I'm sure is surprising no one. The next game is 1889, which is, I believe, the first game implemented on the site and is also fairly popular, so that's not too surprising. 1830 is next, 18 Chesapeake, and then we have kind of a rogues gallery of all the rest of the games. I will not go through these in any real detail, but I will scroll through the rest of the image so that you can see, what some of the middle games are. And then we have basically noise at the bottom, games that are either in alpha and have very few plays, or maybe have been removed from the site for various reasons. So really, when we're talking about analyzing these games, we're going to be focusing on 1846, 1889, and 1830. Because even though we have 20-something thousand games of 1846, if we go back and look at the green games, the ones that are finished, we really have, maybe 8,000 that are worth looking at. And it's even worse for the other games. The next two graphs are really more just out of curiosity and to sanity check the data. I have the games played over time. You can see that 1846 was one of the early games to be implemented in the site and really dominates in terms of total plays. 1889, as noted, was the first game implemented, and then 18 Chesapeake was the second. 1830, which is one of our popular games, was actually one of the later games to be implemented, still very early, of course, and has had kind of a steady presence in the data throughout the website's lifespan. And then the final interesting thing that I looked at was the actual duration of games. And I filtered this so that it wouldn't include any live games, because of course that's going to drag the average way down. So these are games that lasted for greater than a day divided by each title. You can see that we have some outliers here. So 1836 Junior has only 79 plays and for some reason lasts an inordinately long time. There's probably some outliers there. I haven't really filtered this. It was more out of just curiosity. But if we scroll down, we will see that 1830 lives in this region of the graph, which is somewhere in the order of just over a month, or about a month of duration. And a lot of the kind of more common games are in this neighborhood. So, if you're signing up for a game on .games, you should probably anticipate it taking somewhere over a month, unless you're signing up for a notoriously long game like 1817 or one of these other more complicated games. So that really concludes the kind of introduction to the data set and the status of the website. And now I'd really like to just show some of the little bit of a deeper cut of the data that we can do for specific games. So we'll start with 1830, we'll do 1889, and then 1846, the three most popular games. Probably the most basic analysis you could do for these types of games is just to look at the player order, the initial seeding position of the players, and look and see if that has any impact on their win rates. There's been some suggestion that for certain titles there is a significant impact of your seeding order. I don't think 1830 has been one of those games where this has really been suggested, but I figured it was an easy enough thing to look at, so this is one of the first things that I looked at. And you can see that if we take a naive assumption that your expected win rate in a four-player game of 1830 is going to be 25%, that there's really no significant difference based on what position you sit in from that expectation. In theory, we can suppose that player 4 is maybe a little bit worse than player 2, but we did some statistical analysis for this, and this didn't bear any weight, so this may just be noise. The next thing that we looked at was, beyond your seeding order, was does the privates you have affect your win rate? And this is something where I would expect there to be quite a significant relationship. So that's this graph here. And you'll see that the CNA Camden and Amboy has a huge positive impact on your win rate, whereas the B&O has a very massive negative impact on your win rate. And these were both statistically significant. So all these players that are giving away the CNA for bids on the B&O are really doing themselves a disservice. The M&H is the only other private that, at least in our data analysis, had a significant positive impact on your win rate. The rest of the privates didn't seem to have much impact at all. We can also look at the price of the private and see how the price paid for the private affects your win rate as well. And now we're taking it to a little bit of a next level of the analysis, and you can see how you can pretty naturally evolve the analysis into more nuanced information with this data set. So as we look at the price paid for the private along the x-axis, you can see the effect on the probability of winning the game. Now, this is a very kind of basic way of looking at things. This doesn't look at, pairings between the privates, although we have also done that. It doesn't look at the player's skill in any way. It's just looking purely at the data set, what a player paid, and how often they won the game. So again, you can see as the cost of the private increases, the win rate decreases. That's a good way of just checking to make sure that the data makes sense. You can see that the B&O, of course, has a lower probability in accordance with our prior graph. The C&A has a massive increase in your win rate. Even if you're paying north of $250 for it, you're still probably above that 25% expected win rate. So the C&A really is overpowered in keeping with kind of traditional thought. The rest of the privates are a little bit less interesting to look at, but I do think that this is also interesting in the sense that you can determine what is a reasonable price for this private. You can look at the average that winners paid and losers paid, and again, the losers are paying more typically than the winners. And you can also just look at, where's my break-even point? Where am I expecting to win about 25% of games, and what does that price correlate with? So some of these you don't really want to go much over face. No surprise for the Champlain and St. Lawrence, I wouldn't say. Some of them, the C&A or maybe the M&H, you could get away with going a little bit more over face and still expect to win more than 25% of the games. So this is just a brief look at the type of data that can be analyzed for 1830. And I think that while there's no massive insights or surprises in the data, it's a nice sanity check to make sure that everything we're doing is correct. I did look at some linkages between different privates, but I think we will talk about that a little bit more in 1846 rather than 1830. So we'll move on from 1830 and just do a quick run of the same kind of data for 1889. And here we'll see that the player position for 1889, just as for 1830, really doesn't seem to impact the expected win rate. We can look at the privates again and see that the SR, TR, DR, and ER all seem to have significant impacts on your win rate, and they all are positive impacts, whereas the Mitsubishi Ferry, the Ino Takamatsu, and then the Mine company seem to have negative impacts on your win rate, but they didn't achieve statistical significance. So this would give you an idea of what the good privates are. Then if you look at the price that's paid, you can see, similar to 1830, that higher prices are bad for your win rate. But unlike 1830, there's not necessarily a standout private. There's no C&A per se that really increases your win rate. So 1889 seems to pass all the sanity checks, just like 1830, and we can move on to 1846. 1846 is the game that kind of bucks the trend here and does have some interesting data to talk about, even with this just very superficial look at it. You can see that this is a graph of player position against win rate. It's very similar to the other games, but it's interesting because the player position in 1846 actually changes. So this is the player position as you're going through the game, taking actions in the stock rounds and operating rounds. But it's actually the reverse of your player position when you first start the game in the auction. So the first player to start in the auction is actually indicated by number 4 here, and then it works backwards. And I will say it's not indicated on the graph that The only statistical difference between these player positions was that we can say player number 3, who goes second in the draft, is statistically more likely to win than player number 4, the player that goes first in the draft, which I thought was interesting because that is counter to, I guess, conventional wisdom that player 2 in the draft, player 3 in overall order, this bar here, maybe at slightly a disadvantage because they can be forced to buy very expensive private late in the draft. Doesn't seem to be borne out in the data. None of these deviated significantly from the expected win rate, but the only statistically significant difference was that actually the second player in the draft was a little bit better off than the first player in the draft. Maybe that's just noise. Maybe as we have more players or more games, that will not bear out. But I did think that was a little bit interesting because this is the one game where I thought that there maybe would be a relationship between player position and win rate. Similar to the other games, we can look at the privates and see how they impact win rate. And I think it'll be no surprise to any of the experienced 1846 players that the Steamboat Company is by far the best private in the game. Dramatically increases your win rate, possibly because of its synergy with the B&O, although I haven't actually looked at linkages between privates and companies yet. That is something that I would like to do in the future. The other good privates seem to be the Lakeshore Line, Boomtown, the Chicago Western. Chicago Western is not good. It's actually kind of bad. Mail is bad, Big Four is bad, and these are the 6 privates that are statistically significant in terms of their impact on win rates. The rest of the privates, we can't really say if they're good or bad. It seems like there's a trend for some of them being good, but it didn't quite reach significance. Because the 1846 game has a draft, not an auction, there's no price analysis. But again, I think that generally you probably don't want to overpay for mail, considering it's not something that seems to be correlated with a high win rate. I didn't go into the linkages between privates for the other games, but for 1846 I will, just to show that type of analysis. It's going to be a little bit dry if this video hasn't been very dry to begin with, because it's just going to be an Excel table, but I will show that very briefly. As we look at this table, I think it will probably be no surprise to anybody that has just looked at that graph that the Steamboat Company and the Lakeshore Line combination seems to be a very winning combination. The Steamboat Company is presumably the best private in the game, and the Lakeshore Line is the second best, so combining them should be pretty good. No surprise there. We will see that the rest of the combinations that are the best, the highest win rates, all involve the Steamboat Company. So this seems to be a very powerful private in that game. We have a lot of combinations that statistically significantly impact your win rate, and then a lot that are insignificant. And we will see the ones that have a positive relationship or increase your chances of winning are these subset of about 10 combinations here. So if you're playing through the auction and you're picking your privates, you may want to try and find one of these combos. Again, there's a lot more nuanced analysis that could be done, but this is just kind of a first pass and a proof of concept. So where do we go next from here? Well, I think there's a lot of interesting analysis that I'm hoping to do, but there's also a lot of work that needs to be done before it's feasible. So the data really needs to be cleaned of undos and other kind of extraneous actions in the data set to allow for a more nuanced analysis. And I'm working on that now, but I wanted to get this video out because I've been teasing it for a while, and this is a project that's just never going to end. So I have to just make a video at some point and then move on from there. So that's what I'm working on. There are a couple of kind of negative things, or I guess distasteful things that come from looking at this type of data. And I will make a follow-on video to this video, hopefully tomorrow, where I go in to that and show why this type of data can be potentially game-breaking, specifically for 1846 and some of the other titles on the site, and maybe suggest that there should be some changes to the way the site works to protect the integrity of these games. But you'll have to wait until tomorrow or sometime this week for that. So thanks for watching. Excited for this new project and type of video, and we'll definitely be back with more information in the future.